right, and with that very abrupt ending to the tune here, I am joined with my friends Andrew Hunter and Brian Morehead. Good
Peace.
morning, my friends.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, Brian. You're full of love today, which is
Full of
always
love. Just
awesome.
all over the place.
All over. What was the Ringo Starr thing that you used to do from? It was from like peace of love. It was like
Peace
from
and
Howard
love, man.
Stern, I
Peace and
believe.
love. Peace and love. I
Peace
still
and
use it.
love, peace and love. Can kind of hear you well, but you're a little light. So today we are talking. This is the first of the lessons learned series that I coerced these two gentlemen to work with me on to talk about, and it's about the first one. We're doing a few others, but the first one is really about taking ownership and responsibility. And we had a guest on. I'm going to play a clip from him in a few minutes, Chef Toon, that I think said it really well about what it means. And it really caused me to recall how, taking ownership and responsibility for things has meant a lot to me, both personally and professionally. And I've heard it so many times, and I think we've all heard this concept said to us a lot of different ways. It started with my mom probably telling me to take responsibility for things when I used to believe that washing your hands meant, taking dirty hands and putting them under water and putting all the dirt onto the towel and stupid things like that I used to do. But you've all heard, go look in the mirror, when you're responding to anything that maybe you have done or something that took place. And I don't know that I really had a good understanding of kind of how to apply that into my career until I really started to think about it. I read a few books on the topic, and we'll touch on that as well. But it really caused me to kind of take that as a default attitude of taking ownership for kind of the things in my purview. And it really has meant quite a bit. I'm going to share this little clip from Shannon, Chef Toon, that we had on a couple of weeks ago, because I think he just said it extraordinarily well.
If I have an employee who can't do a job, it's probably my fault. It's either I didn't spend enough time training you, or I hired you for a position you weren't qualified for yet. You know what I'm saying? So unless you just refuse to do something that you can do, it's probably my fault. So I always, before I react, I try and look inward and say, all right, what did I do wrong here?
I thought he said that so well, and I thought about it a ton after that, and because it comes up to me all the time, kind of the mindset of, okay, take responsibility for things prior to them happening, and in my world of design work that I do, and then later the problems that come up are a lot of times as a result of maybe not taking as much ownership of a particular thing as I could have. I'm going to tell you a little bit a story about something that I remember quite well about this. This is really more about leadership in a team. I was working at a large restaurant company where I was asked to come in and implement a lot of changes. The brand was going through a whole lot of change. We were implementing a new design, a lot of new service styles. There were a lot of folks that had been with the company for a long time. And it was hard for them, to have new people come in. And I wasn't the only one. There was other folks on the team. And even Andrew, I think you participated in some of this with this company. But there was just a whole lot of things happening. There was a facilities department that was kind of put under my purview, as well as obviously the design and development piece of it. And I remember there was a couple of team members that were really kind of struggling with the changes that were taking place. And there was an opening that we were doing, and we had the entire team there, most of the team there. And now that I think about it, it was most of the team except for kind of those folks that were struggling. to kind of be on board. And I think it was because I didn't make sure that they were there, in hindsight. While we were doing that, we were kind of setting up the store and everyone was having a good time. We're kind of installing artwork and, just doing kind of last minute things. And I had invited everyone there as something I thought it would be fun for us to do. And we needed to do it. So one of the team members that was kind of struggling had stopped by in part of it. And he was kind of just seeing what was going on because that store was actually in his kind of facilities responsibility. And I remember real specifically, later, unfortunately, there was a time when that team member was getting ready to leave and he was kind of standing around, kind of looking around. And I've often wondered what would have happened had I made sure that person, felt welcome and asked them to stay and participate in what was going on. But instead, I kind of put it at the time, I was thinking, well, that's, on them. If they want to participate, it's on them. I wasn't really thinking that, as the leader, that it was my responsibility to make sure that they felt included. First of all, did they feel included? They feel like we wanted them to be there. And maybe that would have changed the entire relationship going forward. And I've thought about that a number of times since. So it's been something that's on my mind. I'm guessing, Brian, you have a similar experience.
Well, I think it's we talk about extreme ownership and really, I think from a leadership perspective, in relation to my own team at Singer Equipment, like every one of the 21 people on the team, obviously has a specific role revolving around opening, designing, installing tremendous kitchen facilities throughout, kitchens and bars throughout the country. So over the course of my own career, you get to a point, right, where you like, I think all of us are, it's not the Andrew Hunter show. It's not the Andy Simpson show. It's not the Brian Morehead show. It's really about our team. And then what can we do to give them, when we say extreme ownership, let them take the lead role. Let them be the person who is talking with our clients and discussing. And that, quite honestly, it can be really nerve-wracking for when you come through a point in your career and you've had, there's a certain level of success that comes. But I've always believed that my responsibility wasn't my responsibility was to the people on the team to give them the best opportunity that should something, Brian Moore go away and they're ready to step up and take that leadership role. And sometimes that comes from putting ourselves into uncomfortable situations. I can tell you a couple times last year, we had multi-million-dollar big projects that I purposely stepped aside to allow our team member leading that project to take it through. And certainly it's something I've dealt with developers and different types of customers over the course of the year and feel completely comfortable doing that. However, this was a new stretch for our particular employee to be talking to owners, to be to hear what they say, to understand where their thought process is. And quite honestly, it was very scary in the very beginning, but it was extremely rewarding when you come to the end of the process and the people call you and say, "Hey, listen, I was speaking with John Brown and he's done a great job for you," or Ken Deming or whoever we're working with. But I really want to put those people in those positions where they're the ones driving the ship. It's not me. I'm just I'm carrying the water. I'm not the guy. We're not the guys out there scoring 30 points anymore. We're putting them in a position to be successful. And really, quite honestly, now at this point in my career, that's I'm about pushing those other people forward, giving them those experiences, which for us in extreme ownership can be nerve-wracking and challenging. So yes, absolutely. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely, it did. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how you've taken ownership for training, and training those people to make sure that they're able to do, get into those uncomfortable situations. And that's kind of the different mindset of thinking about your employees and kind of everything within your purview. as your responsibility, right? If you had not viewed it that way, you might have thought, okay, well, I've got to get the right person in the right job and put them out there. And boy, I hope they can do it, and it's a different mindset though, than what you were just saying about you took the responsibility to say, okay, I need to make sure to get those people in the right places and get their training and their communication skills to the point where they can handle that and then step back and allow them to do it.
And it is tremendously rewarding when you see it done successfully. And, listen, we haven't gotten here overnight. It's been a process, right? Like our careers are a process. We've taken the good, the bad, and the decisions that we've made, and hopefully, teach that next generation of people how to do it a little bit better. And I think that really comes, that's part of the leadership journey that you get to at a certain point. And I know, Andrew in the kitchen, obviously, and we heard Shannon on the last Resolute call, how he trains and puts everything he has into, those people. So he leaves nothing on the table. I say all the time, when I leave and I go away, I don't want to leave one bit of knowledge, whether that be from an equipment perspective, from dealing with personalities, customers. I owe it to the people that I work with to give them every bit of information, knowledge, anything that I have that can make them better than me.
Yeah, when I think about taking ownership and leadership, I always go to communication. And I think that that's what both of you guys are talking about. And it's certainly what Shannon was talking about as well, at least in part. So communication can take a couple of different directions. It can be as simple as having a conversation and believing that employee that Shannon is scratching his head about, believing that she really does want to do a good job. And so now how can I reach her? I'm in a situation where as a consultant, I'm often coming in and given leadership responsibility, but almost on loan in a way. And so how do you do that when the people that you're working with that are reporting to you know that you're not going to be there in 3 months or 6 months or even in some cases in an extreme way a few weeks. And so I think a lot of it also, we can't forget about simple things like hospitality. When you're in a management position and you're taking leadership, your job is really to be hospitable, right? To make people, your employees, feel welcome and valued. And I think that when they do that, or when you do that, almost everybody will respond in kind and do the work that you want them to do. So making a personal connection is always good. I'm on a weekly call with a client, and it's a big project, and I'm in charge of it. And but it's big because all these other people have to do their work, right, in order for it to be successful. It's not just me doing something and then presenting it, like is often the case. It's these 4 people having to come together and bringing their brands together. So I know it sounds silly, but there's this one guy on the call, and he always has a background. I noticed, Brian, you had a tropical background during Chef Shannon's video. This guy has a background, and I always say, well, where in the world is Jan today? Right. And that's kind of how I like to start, because sometimes there's the Saharan desert behind him. Sometimes there's something that looks kind of like you, et cetera. And I noticed that brings his shoulders down. He's a great, friendly guy anyway. And it just makes him feel like he can have a normal conversation now. So that's what we try to do, is we try to get people to be productive, but have normal conversations so they don't feel like they're under the gun even when they are.
Yeah. Understood.
The other quick thing that I wanted to say that I think you guys might be able to riff a little bit off of is that when I think about lessons learned, they don't have to be big, right? I like to think about, and I was confessing to Andy a week or so ago, I'm not a reader of management books and styles. In fact, I'll make a confession. I'm pretty sure I haven't read a management book.
You got a lot of books up there on that bookshelf, though, Andy.
Well, these are all food books. These are all cookbooks, and all of these I have read, or at least I haven't read them from cover to cover, but they're great references. I'm still old enough where I do Google food stuff on the internet, but looking at books from trusted sources is always good when you're looking for something. But well, now I want, just little things. If you take a moment, if you have an exchange like we're having now, and you take a moment to reflect on that exchange, it doesn't even have to be super conscious. You can learn from that exchange. And so I just think that lessons learned is about being conscious of what you're doing and talking about every day.
Yep. And that can be, when we say that on each project of the 200 projects that we do every year, we want to make sure, and you talked about communication as a group, we openly communicate about our mistakes, right? I mean, we always talk about, all right, well, let's talk about it so we make sure that we don't, this doesn't become a continual thing, that we can make the correction. And, I think a lot of times what we learn from our mistakes. And if you don't learn, as Ben Franklin said, if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're bound to repeat them. And we want to make sure that you don't do that. And it's the same in leadership, right? You can't treat, everybody can't be, treated the same in regards to their personality type, because everybody's personality is different. How Andy communicates or how I communicate with Andy could be different than how I communicate with another person, because you just have to understand really the personality management. And that's the one thing of my own leadership journey that I think I've learned the most from is it's not necessarily how incredibly intelligent you believe you are or can be, or the success that you've had. It's really kind of listening, being a good listener, learning about the other person, what drives them, what motivates them, what excites them on a day-to-day basis, and then just try to keep them moving along on that journey, because no two paths are the same. And on my own team, we have 21 people with 21 diverse personalities, and each and every one of us we have an independent individual relationship where not everybody is, I don't deal with everybody the same. So it really comes down to, understanding the personalities of your people, but ultimately just, again, pushing them forward, trying to give them, all of the information that Andrew has and Andy has from a culinary side and from a design side, and move them forward. And then they're going to take it and run with it. They're going to make the path their own. They're going to forge their own stuff. We just have a little bit of a, if we can just help them a little bit in that early stage and let them formulate their own style, their own, but it has to start with us.
Yeah.
I think Andy and I also were talking the other day about intelligence, IQ and EQ, and how emotional intelligence in our role as leaders and managers is the emotional part of our intelligence is much more important than the intellect of our intelligence, especially because let's face it, what we do isn't rocket science necessarily. I mean, it's intricate, it's detail oriented. There are things that are more important than others, but it's still not rocket science, right? And but managing people in those 21 different diverse personalities in some ways kind of is, but it's just a different kind of science. Yeah. And so I do think that emotional intelligence is an important way to be successful.
Absolutely. There was something I was thinking about when both of you were talking, Brian, when you were talking about how your team gets together and you openly communicate. One of the tricks, I guess, of taking responsibility and showing extreme ownership is having a culture in which it's okay to say, hey, that was a mistake. I made it. So let's move on. So as a group, you can have that environment. And I think one of the most interesting ways I've seen that happen is when something happens and it is, maybe it's someone else did something wrong, but they're under your purview, and you just say, okay, that's my fault. And they go, what? no, it's my fault. I should have given you clear understanding, or obviously I didn't explain how important that was, or I didn't give you the tools. So let's work on that. And what pretty much always happens in that case is that person that you're talking to will go, well, wait a minute, I messed that up. Okay, maybe you did, but it's, as the leader, it's my responsibility to make sure that you've got the tools that you need. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, Brian, which is you've got an atmosphere there within your team where everybody knows they can do that, right? And openly share when maybe they did something wrong.
Well, I think it comes down to, listen, there's no perfect jobs. There's no perfect beings. There's we all make mistakes, and sometimes when you make mistakes and you're in a business situation, those can be financial, and as opposed to, I never have found it to be beneficial to put that in somebody's face and beat them down. That is not the way to help or to inspire inspiration or confidence in people, but letting them know that those things happen. And we've all three of us, I can tell you, we probably can think about more mistakes that we've made and that we can care to discuss. But it's from those times that help other people learn and don't do this. And I did this when I was at this point in my career. Don't do that. So or try to do it a different way. So it really, everything that I think we're teaching comes from our own experience that we've learned over the course of our careers together. And I think that's very, very valuable to all of our teammates and all the people we interact with.
And I think that when you create a culture of ownership and somebody makes a mistake but it's constructive ownership, right? And so when somebody makes a mistake, they bring it to the group, either to you personally or privately, whatever, or to the group and say, hey, you know what, guys, I screwed this up, blah, blah, blah. Because you talked about financial implications. A lot of times a mistake happens, maybe it's judgment, maybe it's a decision, whatever. If you address it right away, you can either mitigate or remove the financial detriment. But if you sit on it and stew about it, et cetera, and then all of a sudden that pizza oven really doesn't show up, right? and then it is a problem, right? But if you would have taken ownership and figured it out, and maybe it costs a little bit more to get it there, but ultimately that was worth it because now the pizza oven is installed and the restaurant can open its doors.
100%. I always say, like, if you're gonna, you're putting your head in the sand, hoping that a problem is going to go away, I can promise you it never works. Never 100% of the time, that never works. So being proactive and taking that responsibility and correcting it, maybe it costs a few bucks more, but you know what? Your customer doesn't know that. He doesn't care about that. All he knows is that when he had a challenge, you took care of him. And the next time he's going to do a project, he's going to be thinking about you and what you did, whether he knows what you did or not. But I always say, like, doing the right thing never takes a day off, and whether our customers know it or not, doing the right thing matters.
The other thing, and I just want to give a call out to chefs, but I think chefs have gotten over the years, and I've worked with some that deservedly so get a bad rap, right? But, when I see Shannon, and I don't know how old Shannon is, but he's not of the generation that was the sort of the hard ass chef, right? He and I are more of the generation where we've come up through the ranks. We know what it's like to work under a steel-toed guy, and we want to create an environment that's productive and serious, but also comfortable and dare I say fun, right? And so I don't know Shannon, but I'd love to meet him because I think that he exemplifies, by that clip, he really exemplifies leadership and ownership of that leadership. So I think that's really, really terrific.
Awesome.
Not all chefs are jerks.
That's funny.
That is funny. And, maybe they're not. I guess you and Shannon are proofs of that, right? So that's probably why I like both of you, so much is that you prove that that's not the case. And that's amazing. Well, one of the things, we're going to end this in a couple minutes, but I wanted to end with a little bit of a thought on this. And one of the things that is often brought up when you tell people kind of the default position should be to assume that you're responsible for everything, and because it feels kind of weird at first, because the natural thing is, well, everything that happens isn't my fault, and there's all sorts of vendors that we deal with, and Andrew, I'm in much the same position on a regular basis that you discuss, and really Brian is too, where you're a consultant on individual, but you end up leading a lot of people, and that may be because by default there's no one in the room who's kind of taking ownership of the situation, or your customer, maybe it's the CEO of a company, is kind of asking you, okay, these are all these folks, I need you to take care of this. They may not all know that, but you're doing it anyway. And the default attitude of, okay, I'm literally going to think of it as taking responsibility for everything. That doesn't mean that if every single person, everything that happens is your responsibility 100%. It does, however, mean that if you have the ability to view it that way, that you're, okay, I'm going to view everything from a default position of kind of stepping back, you might want to call it detachment, I think is a good way to think of it. Detach yourself from it and look at it like, okay, I want to make sure this end result happens. So I'm going to take as much responsibility as possible to make sure that whatever is in my sphere of influence, it happens, and I've once I kind of sussed that out, and thought about it, some of the, kind of the fear, I guess, of well, it's not, everything's not my responsibility. But yes, that's true, but I can certainly affect an awful lot of things by taking the default attitude that they are. Mm-hmm. I'm going to close this out today. I'm going to read kind of an excerpt from a book. Brian, you talked about extreme ownership. That's actually the name of an amazing book by a couple of guys that I've learned a lot from and really caused me to think about this, is Jacko Willink and Leif Babin, who, Andrew, I'll give you this book. Maybe you'll read it. It's called Extreme Ownership. It's easy to remember. But these are ex-naval officers and run a consulting company. But they've written extensively on the topic, and I thought I would share a couple of lines from it. A leader must own everything in his or own world. There is no one else to blame. The leader must acknowledge mistakes and admit failures, take ownership of them, and develop a plan to win. Ownership of everything that impacts their mission. This concept is the number one characteristics of any high-performance winning team. Ownership cannot blame the subordinates. They must first look in the mirror at themselves. The leader bears full responsibility for explaining the mission, which is something we didn't talk about today, but is really, the underlying aspect of making sure everyone understands what the mission is, so that you can hold yourselves and them accountable. Another topic for us, developing the tactics and securing the training and resources to enable the team to properly, successfully execute. The leader must train and mentor everyone in their purview. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of this. It's realizing that every single thing that's in your purview, there's no one else to blame if it goes wrong. And so don't look for that. Instead, think about it as a default. I'm going to try to make sure everything in my purview can be solved. And if that is someone who's maybe even in your periphery, who you're, okay, I want to make sure that happens for my end result. So I'm gonna give a lot of effort to it. And that mindset has certainly changed both my personal life and taking responsibility for my relationships as well as in business. So that's what I've got today, my friends. So thank you both for coming.
Excellent. I like the idea of doing maybe a few of these, however many make sense, on this topic. And I'm not going to tell this story now, but there's a story that I have that was a really challenging management situation for me. and I approached it with some candor, but mostly honesty, and the person that I was dealing with took ownership, and he went from being this close to being fired to getting a promotion. And it wasn't because of what I did, but I gave him permission to do what he did. Right. So anyway, I think that we can maybe take this topic up again in the next week or so, and think about some of these stories, and hopefully inspire the people that are on this podcast to think about some of those stories in their own life as well.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing it. And I hope we will. The idea is I'm hoping we can do these maybe every couple of weeks. I thought, and I think I wrote this to both of you, that maybe the next we talk about was ego, which is something that has gotten in my way a number of times, and hopefully
there's no ego in the restaurant business. There's no.
Yeah, and there's no chefs that are egotistical bastards either. That doesn't happen. And then designers, people always go, "Oh, you're a freaking designer. You're gonna, say this or that." So, no ego, and what does that mean? So that's what I hope to talk about. But I think we're going to find that this idea of extreme ownership comes up like everywhere. It comes up in so many aspects of things that we talk about in leadership and how we interact with folks in the world. So, with that, my friends, I am going to turn on our exit, and take care, my friends. Love you
Thanks,
both.
guys.
And, we'll see
Later,
you
Andrew.
Take it easy.